Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, students. Here I'm going to start a new series of lectures on the novel Wuthering Heights. So here I go with the chapter number one. It is 1801. Mr. Lockwood writes in his diary that Wuthering, wanting solitude after unintentionally hurting a woman he admired because he dislikes shows of emotion. He has rented a house called Thrushcross Grange in the Yorkshire's countryside. Lockwood heard the women because he sees himself as civilized and therefore does not like to show his feelings, his passion. Like uh, any courteous or a noble man or a civilized man who thinks it very bad to show his emotions. He is behaving in a very same fashion where he keeps his feelings and passions uh, personal and private. Soon after arriving there, he visits his landlord named Mr. Heathcliff, whom he describes as a gruff yet noble, dark skinned gypsy. Heathcliff lives in a manor called Wuthering Heights, which is named after the harsh winds that blow across the nearby moors. The house is strong and sturdy and has grotesque carvings around the front door. During the visit, Heathcliff is amused when Lockwood is nearly attacked after Heathcliff leaves him alone with a bunch of savage dogs. Yet Lockwood finds Heathcliff compelling and uninvited, announces that he will return soon. In this description of the meeting between Heathcliff and Lockwood, the narrator of uh, the co-narrator of the novel, Lockwood, grotesque carvings, menacing dogs, and a general sense of menace are all staples of Gothic literature. Also, notice how Wuthering Heights and by extension its inhabitants are directly connected to nature and a wild nature that at that the house is named after the harsh winds of the moors. So this was the first chapter in which we are just introduced two main characters. One of them is the narrator of the novel, co-narrator of the novel. The other is the main character of the novel, Heathcliff. And we are also introduced with some characteristic, environmental characteristics of the places, especially of Wuthering Heights, which is akin to wild wind and nature. In chapter 2, Lockwood returns to Wuthering Heights the next day. As he arrives, it begins to snow. No one answers uh, his knock at the door, and an old servant with a heavy Yorkshire accent named Joseph tells him that Heathcliff is away. He does not allow Lockwood to enter home, even though it was snowing heavily. Many plot points in the novel coincide with harsh weather, further blinding the story's Gothic feel. These plot events always occur at Wuthering Heights. Eventually, a young man lets Lockwood in and brings him to a sitting room. In this room also is a beautiful but rather rude and haughty young woman. Soon after Heathcliff arrives, he scolds Lockwood for coming, then begrudgingly invites him to dinner. We further are introduced with some more Gothic mystery. It is noteworthy that the contrast between the seemingly low class rough, that is natural, young man and higher class beautiful but haughty, and that is civilized women. During the meal, Lockwood learns that the young woman whom he assumed was Heathcliff's wife, the landlord's wife, is actually the widow of Heathcliff's son, and that rough young man whom Lockwood thought was Heathcliff's son is Heathcliff's nephew. We find a very tangled family trees um, are another common which are another common feature of Gothic tales. So up to this point of the novel or the narrative, we find things more Gothic. The meal is awkward. At one point, the young woman threatens to use witchcraft on Joseph, the servant. The snow also turns to be a blizzard, and while discussing how Lockwood will get home, the woman tells Heathcliff that if he lets Lockwood leave alone, she hopes Lockwood's ghost will haunt him. More Gothic elements. A ghost haunting Heathcliff foreshadows future events, as does the woman's hope for revenge on Heathcliff. Note that how the storm intensifies along with the passions in the house. Fed up with the bickering and gibberish, and with no one willing to guide him home, Lockwood takes a lantern, promising to return it the next day, and leaves. But Joseph thinks he is stealing the lantern and sends the dog after him. This host of dogs pin Lockwood down, which amuses Heathcliff and Harrington. Lockwood then gets a nosebleed and is forced to spend the night at Wuthering Heights. Zilla, the housekeeper, leads him inside. In this scene here, we see Lockwood comes off quite simply as a wimp. He can't handle the passions in the Wuthering Heights and also can't handle either the storm or dogs. Heathcliff and Harrington are amused because they could easily handle such things, which are we find a contrast between nature and civilization. In the next chapter, that is chapter number 3, Zilla brings Lockwood to a room that Heathcliff usually doesn't allow anyone to stay in. Left alone, Lockwood notices three names scratched into the paint of the bed. These names are Catherine Earnshaw, Catherine Heathcliff, and Catherine Linton. Lockwood also finds a 25 years old diary written by Catherine Earnshaw. He reads an entry from a time just after her father died, in which her old brother Hindley makes Catherine and Heathcliff listen to Joseph's dull sermons. From the entry, it is clear that Hindley hated Heathcliff, but that Catherine and Heathcliff were close. The mysterious room no one is allowed to stay in, the mysterious names carved into the bed, and the discovered diary are all Gothic elements. Through the diary, Lockwood gets his first glimpse into the story behind Wuthering Heights. That night, Lockwood has a nightmare in which he breaks a window to get some air, and a child grabs his hand. She says her name is Catherine Linton and begs to enter, claiming she's been trying to get in for 20 years. Lockwood fights her and frees himself. She continues to beg and he cries out. His yell cries into the real world. Heathcliff hears it and comes running. He's upset to find Lockwood in the room. While Lockwood's upset over the ghost, Lockwood describes his nightmare to Heathcliff, who becomes livid when Lockwood says the dream wife, waif deserve deserves to be punished. Heathcliff, sobbing, opens the window and shouts for Catherine to come in. This scene contains one truly supernatural event in the novel, with Lockwood dreaming of the real Catherine Linton. But it is Heathcliff's response to the dream which is most interesting. The way that he seems to want or even need this ghost to haunt him. Heathcliff's all consuming love and passion for Catherine is made clear in this scene, and that love is connected to nature when Heathcliff throws open the window in order to speak with Catherine. The next morning, Heathcliff escorts Lockwood home. The servants of Thrushcross Grange are overjoyed to see Lockwood. They feared he had died in the storm. But Lockwood, in no mood for company, locks himself in the study. While Heathcliff opens the window to the storm to try to speak with Catherine, Lockwood locks himself inside to escape all that passion. And again, here we find the theme of nature versus civilization. The next chapter, the story furthers, that is chapter number 4. Back at Thrushcross Grange, Lockwood starts feeling lonely and asks his housekeeper, Nellie Dean, to tell him about Heathcliff and Wuthering Heights. Nellie Dean says she grew up at Wuthering Heights with Hindley and Catherine Ancho, and tells Lockwood that Heathcliff has a dead son and is rich enough to live in a house grander than Wuthering Heights. She also explains that the young woman he met at Wuthering Heights is named Kathy and is the daughter of Catherine Earnshaw and the previous tenants of Thrushcross Grange, Edgar Linton. Additionally, she says that Hareton is the last of the Earnshaws, a very old family. This is a very important scene or dialogue between Nellie Dean and Lockwood, where we are introduced to the background or backdrop of the stories of these characters. And we are briefly introduced to these important characters. Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights have been established as symbols of civilization and nature, respectively. Uh, Thrushcross Grange stands for civilization, whereas Wuthering Heights symbolizes nature and brood side of or wild side of nature. Nellie now makes clear that families that lived in two houses are deeply entangled. The reference to Heathcliff's money and to Hareton's ancient family also brings up the questions of class. If Heathcliff has so much money, why is he living in a weather-worn place like the Heights, and why is the high class Hareton so rough? These are two questions to be answered, and we can only understand these conditions of these characters or find the answer to these questions after going through the stories of these characters. The point of view shifts from Lockwood to Nellie as she tells the story. From here onwards, we will hear the story from the mouth of Nellie Dean. Mr. Earnshaw, the farmer master, she starts telling the story, where she tells that the farmer master of the Wuthering Heights, Mr. Earnshaw, was a strict but kind man. A kind man. When Nellie was little, he returned from a business trip to Liverpool with Heathcliff, an orphan boy he had found on the street. So Heathcliff was brought from Liverpool to home by Mr. Earnshaw. He was a gypsy. Earnshaw's daughter Catherine took to her foster brother almost immediately, but Earnshaw's son Hindley hated him. Hindley was jealous of his father's affection for Heathcliff and expressed his jealousy by bullying him. Heathcliff responded with silence. Only Mrs. Earnshaw's wife, took Hindley's side against Heathcliff, but she died just 2 years after Heathcliff arrived. This is one of the major reasons why these two main characters, main characters of Heathcliff and Hindley, are against each other. Orphans are another common Gothic element. Heathcliff's status as an orphan also puts him in a peculiar position in regard to class. He is a low class person brought into a high class family. He was a gypsy and brought into a higher class. In other words, he is an outsider, an alien. And the fact that he was brought into the family and brought up there, and in some ways stole Hindley's position, sets in motion the gears of revenge that will drive the rest of the novel. Hindley wants to regain his position at the expense of Heathcliff, who innocently, it must be said, innocently uh, took it from him. So Hindley feels some sort of rivalry towards Heathcliff and wants to bully him every now and again to seek his to satiate his grudge. In the next chapter, that is chapter number 5, we find that time passes and Mr. Earnshaw's health deteriorates, and he becomes even less accepting of Hindley's behavior towards Heathcliff. He sends Hindley away to college, allowing Catherine and Heathcliff to grow closer. Heathcliff has now completely taken Hindley's place at the Heights. In Hindley's absence, Heathcliff and Catherine can grow closer. As Mr. Earnshaw nears death, he becomes interested in Joseph's harsh and rigid religious beliefs. Meanwhile, to her father's dismay, Catherine is constantly going on adventures with Heathcliff and getting into trouble. Though she teases her father about this, she loves him deeply and is the one holding him when he dies. Fire and brimstone religion is another common feature of Gothic novels. As Mr. Earnshaw fades, Catherine and Heathcliff live in a kind of paradise, adventuring in nature. Also, it is noteworthy that Catherine's tomboy behavior, she doesn't fit the stereotype of a genteel girl. On the stormy night of Mr. Earnshaw's death, Catherine and Heathcliff console each other. They talk of heaven, imagining it as a beautiful place. Another storm during a major plot event. Yet storm doesn't scare Catherine or Heathcliff. It is worth mentioning or worth noticing how they think about heaven in terms of beauty, as if it is like nature, and their obvious love for one another. They console and comfort each other in this troubled time of the death of their father. In the next chapter, that is chapter number 6, Hindley returns for his father's funeral. He brings with him his somewhat silly and ineffectual wife, Frances. As his father's heir, Hindley is now master of Wuthering Heights and makes immediate changes, such as moving the servants to the backwaters. He also forces Heathcliff to give up his education. Heathcliff is not a servant at Wuthering Heights, uh, and but he was he was being fostered there as one of the family members. So he forces Heathcliff to give up his education and instead to work in the fields. Yet, for the most part, Hindley ignores both Heathcliff and Catherine, who escape their domineering brother by escaping to go play on the moors. On arriving back, Hindley takes revenge on Heathcliff by using the rules of class male inheritance to assert dominance and to use the dominance to deprive Heathcliff of an education and force him to work like a common laborer. Heathcliff, along with Catherine, finds sanctuary from Hindley's vengefulness in nature. One day, Heathcliff and Catherine don't return from one of their adventures, and Hindley orders that they be locked out. Nellie, though, waits up for them, and she is there when Heathcliff comes back alone. He tells Nellie that he and Catherine had been at Thrushcross Grange spying on Edgar and Isabella Linton. Heathcliff was impressed by their house, but he thought the Linton children were idiots. When he and Catherine laughed aloud at them, the Lintons realized someone was outside. As Heathcliff and Catherine tried to escape, the Linton's dog, Skulker, caught them and bit Catherine's foot. Heathcliff and Catherine, who embody nature, discover Edgar and Isabella, who are more civilized. And just as Heathcliff and Harrietta laughed at Lockwood in chapter 2, Heathcliff and Catherine's first instinct is to laugh at the civilized Lintons for being weak and silly. Yet at the same time, they are impressed by Thrushcross Grange itself. In other words, they are impressed by the trappings of civilization, by what being civilized can get you. When the Linton realize that Catherine is from Wuthering Heights, they bring her inside and insist that Catherine stay with them while she heals. But they are shocked at Heathcliff's rough clothes and language and refuse to let him stay with Catherine. Before leaving, Heathcliff spies on them. He sees how the Lintons fuss over Catherine and how much she likes the attention. Here we find in this scene by denying Heathcliff an education, Hindley forced Heathcliff into another lower class, and the civilized Lintons are very judgmental and careful to keep out any one of a lower class into their home. Uh, we may also notice that how Catherine has already learned that there are some pleasure to civilization. She loves to be entertained by others. The next day, Mr. Linton goes to Wuthering Heights and berates Hindley for letting Catherine run wild. Ashamed, Hindley blames Heathcliff and says that Heathcliff may longer see or talk to Catherine. Civilized people use shame as a weapon, and ashamed Hindley now takes further revenge on Heathcliff by trying to separate him from Catherine. So, in a way, he has got another way to tease or to separate these two kids. In the next chapter, that is chapter number 7, Catherine stays at Thrushcross Grange for 5 weeks. Mr. Linton spends the time teaching her how to be a proper young lady. Catherine returns around Christmas wearing a beautiful dress. Until now, Catherine has been natural, wild, a tomboyish, and unaware of class. Her stay at the Lintons changes the first two, as she is now a proper girl in a dress. Hindley allows Heathcliff to greet her like the other servants. Catherine kisses Heathcliff hello, but but teases that he's dirty compared to Edgar. Heathcliff walks out, growling that he'll be as dirty as he likes. And as her comment to Heathcliff makes it clear that she is also being made aware of class and sees being civilized as superior. Edgar and Isabella come to Wuthering Heights for Christmas. Heathcliff allows Nellie to make him presentable, but It turns out that Mrs. Linton allowed her children to come only on the condition that they be kept away from Hindley sends Heathcliff to the kitchen. Before he can go, Edgar makes a disparaging comment about Heathcliff's appearance, and Heathcliff throws applesauce in Edgar's face. Hindley locks Heathcliff in the attic. The civilized classes assert their power by discriminating against the lower class, and they accomplish the discrimination through derogatory language. In contrast, the more natural, Heathcliff expresses his resentment through violence. Catherine, though, thinks that both Edgar and Hindley mistreated Heathcliff, and after dinner she slips away from the others to visit Heathcliff. Nellie also takes pity on Heathcliff and brings him down to the kitchen for some food. While eating, Heathcliff tells Nellie that he's going to get revenge against Edgar. Nellie then breaks into her story to say that it is late and she must sleep. Lockwood insists that she continues the story right then. Catherine's actions show that even though she has been changed by her exposure to civilization, she still shares a yet deeper connection with Heathcliff. Heathcliff's woo is the first sign of his vengeful nature. He is more like Heathcliff, and she is another self of Heathcliff. Yet she is now overcome or overpowered by the class superiority or nobility. She is much consumed by the wish of being a lady. In next chapter, chapter number 8, Nellie continues her story. The following summer, Frances gives birth to a son, Harriet Ancho, but Frances dies just a week later. Childbirth had aggravated a case of consumption that she had long suffered from. Hindley is devastated. He hands the baby over to Nellie to care for. He turns to alcohol for comfort and takes out his grief on the servants, Catherine and especially Heathcliff. For his part, Heathcliff delights in Hindley's decline. The civilized characters in the novel are often weak or sickly. Hindley's grief is excessive, which at the time was a trait associated with women. Meanwhile, Heathcliff's own desire for revenge has made him almost cold blooded. He feels no sympathy for Hindley's loss and actually delights in his pain. Catherine remains in touch with the Lintons. When she is with them, she acts like proper lady. But when with Heathcliff, she acts just as she used to. She is so natural and carefree while being with or in the company of Heathcliff. Catherine now bridges the gap between civilization and nature. One day, when Hindley is out, Heathcliff doesn't go to the fields and instead plans to spend the day with Catherine. But Catherine admits that she is invited Edgar and Isabella to come visit. Heathcliff comments on how much time Catherine has been spending with the Lintons. She retorts that it's because Heathcliff, is dull and dumb. Edgar arrives just then, alone. Heathcliff storms out. But it isn't possible to span this gap for long without causing some sort of uh, mm, uh, as Catherine is trying to bridge the gap between civilization and nature. That is so impossible to gap this for long without causing some sort of conflict. Inwardly or inbuiltly, she is a wild creature, a wild soul, but she has to pretend to be very noble and civilized one, which is very hard for her. And Catherine chooses civilization and class over her natural connection to, to Heathcliff. Edgar's arrival without Isabella signals that there is a romance between him and Catherine. Catherine then tells Nellie to leave the room since she wants to be alone with Edgar. Nellie refuses. She remains there as the chaperone. Hindley had told her to chaperone uh, Catherine. Furious, Catherine slaps and pinches Nellie. She is her governess and even shakes the crying inheritor. Edgar tries to step in, but Catherine boxes his ears. Shocked and defeated by Catherine's wild behavior, Edgar rushes from the house. But as he leaves, he catches a glimpse of Catherine, and captured by her beauty, he returns. Yet it um becomes clear right away that civilized Edgar can't possibly stand up to the Catherine's fierce natural passions. In fact, when they are together, it is Catherine who takes on the stereotypical male role of power, and Edgar who accepts the more stereotypically passive role of a woman. Nellie leaves Catherine and Edgar alone when she does later enter to warn them that Hindley has come back. Drunk and angry as usual, she has the sense that they have professed their love for each other. These two young souls, Catherine and Edgar, has confessed their love to each other. And it is interesting that Edgar must make his declarations of love quietly in private. It is hard to imagine Heathcliff doing the same. If it have if it were Heathcliff, he would have been doing it uh, differently. In the next chapter, chapter number 9, that night Hindley grabs Harriton from Nellie in a rage, but then accidentally drops the baby over the banister. Luckily, Heathcliff is at the bottom of the steps to catch Harriton without harm. This odd, almost grotesque scene adds to the Gothic menace of the novel. Later, Catherine goes to Nellie in the kitchen. As Heathcliff listens, they were not aware of his being present there or his presence. She tells Nellie that she has accepted Edgar's proposal of marriage. Yet, isn't she sure she should have? Catherine describes a dream in which she was in heaven but didn't feel at home. When angels returned her to Wuthering Heights, she was relieved. She equates marrying Edgar to such a heaven. The heaven of Catherine's dream is a pleasant, civilized place like Grange, but her dream implies that though she feels those things attractive, she'll never escape the wild, passionate part of her nature that is symbolized by Wuthering Heights and which loves Heathcliff. Yet she also says that she cannot marry Heathcliff because Hindley has so degraded Heathcliff that marrying him would be like degrading herself. If she marries Heathcliff, she would degrade herself. Whereas marrying Edgar would would be like upward, uh, moving upward. There would be upward mobility in her status. It will bring status to her name. Hindley's revenge is a success. Even Catherine is affected by Heathcliff's fall to a lower class. Furious and ashamed, Heathcliff leaves and therefore doesn't hear Catherine says that though she must marry Edgar, she loves Heathcliff more than anything, and that nothing could interfere in their relationship, not even marrying Edgar, because she and Heathcliff are essentially the same person. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. These are the exact word of Catherine about Heathcliff. Yet Catherine, at the same time, so passionate about Heathcliff that she can't see how anything can come between them. She's wrong. She does not understand the nature. Heathcliff won't be chained or denigrated. So, this was our first lecture on this novel. Next, we will be discussing some more important events from this very novel. Thank you very much.